Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. Alrighty then. Today, folks, we are actually going to be talking more about practical advice. Practical advice in the sense of when it comes to buying cars, should you buy a new car or should you buy a used car? I figured since this is the GSMC Car Podcast, we should not only talk about the history of cars, new cars that are coming out, specific cars, but we should also offer practical advice when it comes to the car world. In this case, we're going to be talking about buying cars. So basically, we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of buying a new car versus a used car. The first segment is going to be about the pros and cons of buying a new car. And then the second segment will be about used cars. And the third segment will be about tips for buying a used car. And the fourth segment will be about the top 10, in my opinion, used cars to buy. You will find that this is centered around a lot of used cars because I will find that buying a used car is a lot more difficult than buying a new car. A new car has a lot of paperwork and a lot of hoops you have to jump through. This is true. But a used car, there is a lot to choose from. Some are really good. Some are really bad. So you need a lot of wisdom, if you will, when it comes to doing such a purchase as a used car. So let's get started. And thank you for tuning in this week. Let's get started. Okay, so what are the pros of buying a new car? Well, let's just think about this. A new car offers warranty. Now, some manufacturers' warranties are better than others. I know for Kia and Hyundai, I believe they offer like a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty. What a warranty is basically is that if anything goes wrong with the car manufacturer, or the car dealer, I should say, will take care of it for as long as the warranty lasts. Some cars are 3-year, 50,000-mile warranties. Others are 10-year, 100,000-mile warranties, like I mentioned. Some are limited warranties. Some are extended warranties. Some you can lease, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the list goes on and on. But basically, a warranty is a guarantee that if anything goes on with the transmission or the drivetrain or electrics, that instead of you having to pay out of pocket like you normally would have to with a car that's outside of warranty, you can take it to the dealer and the dealer will take care of that for either a reduced price or for free. So that is very good. The thing is with used cars, depending on how old the car is, it might no longer be under warranty. If it's no longer under warranty and it gives you a problem, you have to incur all of those costs. The manufacturer or the dealer that you bought it from is not going to take care of that. So that could be a problem. Reliability. Provided that there are no recalls or built-in problems from the factory, which is always, a possibility, new cars tend to offer a lot more reliability than used cars. Because you think of it, it's a brand new car. It's straight from the factory. You're the first one to have owned it. You're the first one to have really driven it besides the test miles that they obviously have on them. You can buy a used car today and then drive to Canada tomorrow and you might not make it. But if you buy a new car, today and drive to Canada tomorrow, you will probably make it, and the car still has plenty of life left in it because it's never been abused, it's never been used before, it's brand new. Used cars don't always offer that, I guess, reliability from the get-go. A lot of them need some work, and even the ones that don't need some work are going to need some maintenance because they're used. They've been through the ringer a couple of times. I mean, they might need a couple $100 worth of work to get them, extremely reliable again. But with a new car, new cars are especially good for people who don't like to tinker on cars themselves because they're automatically reliable. How long they'll stay reliable is I guess up to the car and the manufacturer and the reliability that the car is known for. For example, a new Mitsubishi Mirage probably won't be as reliable as long as a Toyota Corolla, but that's simply based on manufacturer. But by virtue of the car being new, it's going to be more reliable than a used car. Another thing, technology and convenience. Now, I am not one who likes technology in cars. I believe that technology has its place, and I don't believe that in the automobile is where it should be. Of course, there are certain technologies that are necessary. Airbags are definitely necessary. Crumple zones are definitely necessary. ABS, things of that sort. But I would say that technology and convenience is a huge selling point for a lot of the car market because people like to have as much equipment as possible as they can afford in their cars. People like to have the Bluetooth. People like to be able to talk on the phone without actually having to pick up the phone in the car. People like having the Apple CarPlay where they can sync their phone to their car, and then as soon as the car turns on, it recognizes the phone, and then you're able to play your music without fiddling around with an aux cord or fiddling around with a cassette auxiliary and then doing this and adjusting the volume or fiddling around with one of those radio preset things. I mean, all of that we've done to retrofit older cars, it's nice and all, but sometimes it's just nice to have a car that is meant for entertainment, that's meant for all of that. And another thing, a lot of this technology is geared towards comfort too. You have cars that have heated and cooled seats. I mean, heated seats are nothing new. Cooled seats have just started to appear within the last 5-10 years or so. They're becoming more common. You have cars that have massaging seats. A long time ago, this used to be a luxury feature only, but these are starting to appear on more common cars. The infotainment system makes several cars highly configurable. You can configure your gauge cluster. You can configure your navigation system. You can configure your radio and your sound and how you want the sound to come out. Some cars even allow you to adjust where the sound comes out. I mean, there's a lot of comfort and convenience that comes with the technology of new cars that a lot of people who don't have a new car might be jealous of those who do have new cars because those cars have these things. Now, another thing, as far as pros go, these cars, coupled with the technology, have a lot of safety features. Radar cruise control is a godsend in terms of driving and driving characteristics of a car. Radar cruise control basically allows the car to measure the distance in front of it and the car in front. Well, the distance between the front of the car and the car in front of it. So when you are driving along, if the car in front of you slows down, your car will automatically sense that and slow down as well whenever you engage radar cruise control. This is great for people who don't like to drive in traffic, stop and go traffic especially. The car will go and it will stop. It will go and it will stop. It's like a semi-automatic driving feature in the car. It's almost autopilot in a sense because when it's in that situation, especially if you're not turning, some cars even turn with the road, but especially when you're not turning, radar cruise control allows you to not be so focused on stopping and going, especially in stop and go traffic. The car kind of does that for you. Obviously, you're still engaged with the car behind the wheel. You still have to be touching the wheel. You still have to be, alert. but the car does all the hard work for you, which is great. That's something I kind of wish I had when I lived in Tampa, because coming back from work at 6, 7 p.m., rush hour, especially on I-275 to I-4, I mean, Malfunction Junction, that was crazy. If I had radar cruise control, it would have made my life a lot easier. But like I say, with all of that, there is another pro. There's a lot of pros for owning a new car. That is value. The car still has value. You might buy a new car, and the car might be worth $25,000. And of course, once you drive it off the lot, it's considered used, quote unquote. It's not going to be worth $25,000 if you go and trade it in later on that day or later on that week. But I will say, if your car happens to get severely damaged in a car accident, your car, by virtue of it being brand new, is less likely to be considered a total loss by the insurance company than if you were driving a used car. For example, if you have a 2020 Ford Fusion, or even if they still make the Ford Fusion in 2020, I don't even know if they do, but let's just say they do. 2020 Ford Fusion, you get rear-ended, you incur $6,000 worth of damage in your car. The car is worth probably $23,000, $24,000. The insurance company is going to deem it worth fixing, and then you'll be able to get your car fixed about a month later after you finish using the rental. They'll give you your car back, and then you can continue driving. If you have a 1998 Cadillac Deville like I had back in 2015, at that time that car was worth $1,500 at best. I got rear-ended. I incurred about $4,000 or $5,000 worth of damage on my car. The car was fixable, but it was not deemed worth it because the car was worth only $1,500. So therefore, it was declared a total loss. The car got taken away. The insurance company wrote my dad and I a check for the value of the car, and then we were left with $1,500 to go buy another car. That won't happen to you if you are buying a new car. A new car, if you incur $5,000, $6,000 worth of damage, is still going to be worth fixing later on down the line if you were to get into a car accident. However, there are cons to owning a new car. Depreciation. Don't think that you're going to buy a new car and then sell it for the same amount that you bought it for. That's grossly unrealistic. With a new car, as soon as you drive it off the lot, it will be considered used. It will begin to depreciate. That is not to poo-poo new cars or people who buy them. It's just a fact of the matter. They are no longer considered brand new. They don't have the cachet of being brand new. So after you use it for a couple of years, especially after you finish paying it off, the car's not going to be worth nearly as much as you paid, and it's not going to be worth nearly as much as when it was new. That's simply a fact in the matter. You can still get some money out of it, but don't expect to make your money back after you've been using a car for a couple of years. New technology, especially with cars nowadays, will not age well. Let's take an example of German cars of old. German cars of old, and by old, I don't mean of the 80s. I'm talking about late 90s, early 2000s. These cars were way ahead of their time as far as technology goes. Now, let's look in retrospect. Now we are 15, 20, 25 years later when things like the Mercedes-Benz S-Class came out. How many of them are in perfect working order? Almost none of them. All of them have some issue, some electrical gremlin, something that has caused the car to break down unnecessarily because the technology in it was unnecessary to begin with. So things like radar cruise control, things like Apple CarPlay, things like stop and go, certain cars stop at a stoplight or whenever you're not using the car to conserve fuel, and as soon as you get off of the brake, the car starts up again. That's putting a lot of stress on your ignition. Your ignition will eventually go out. You will get to a point where your car will stop, and instead of going when you take your foot off of the brake, it will continue staying stopped. I mean, cars that don't have that don't have to worry about that. The more you put technology in a car, the more there is to break, and we have a lot to learn from ultra luxury cars of old that are now aging. As Tyler Hoovy would say, they are hoopties now because they are grossly depreciated and they have a ton of problems, and people are just trying to get rid of them. So a car that used to be $95,000, $100,000 when you could buy for $5,000 now because, the owner wants to get rid of it. It's giving a bunch of problems, and it's simply not worth it anymore. And people who are that rich, who can afford $95,000, $100,000 cars, they're not going to keep their car. They're going to trade it in every couple of years and get the newest, latest, best thing. And then these cars tend to trickle down. They get to someone who is slightly less wealthy, but still wealthy enough to take care of the car. They keep it for a few years, and then it gets to someone who is even less wealthy. And eventually, by the fifth or sixth owner, the car has been abused. It's not been taken care of. It ends up in a junkyard. And of course, when you buy a new car, that's not necessarily your problem, but you just keep in mind, as your new car ages, things will begin to fail, and especially with new cars that they're selling nowadays with all the technology, expect failures sooner rather than later. My friend Alana has a 2020 Toyota Corolla. The other day, it just stopped on her in the middle of the road, and it says, check engine. Why does it say that? She doesn't know. Her Apple CarPlay is messing up. And this car is a 2020 car. This car is less than a year old. So this is just to show you that the cars and all the technology that they have nowadays is not what they're cracked up to be. Take a Toyota Corolla from 20 years ago. A Toyota Corolla would have never done that because there was not a lot of technology in it for it to break. Toyota Corollas of the 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, these cars are indestructible. You can't kill these cars. But nowadays, a Toyota Corolla has all this technology foolishness in it, and the car is breaking down on you after less than a year. This is a problem. This is a problem that we're seeing in a lot of auto manufacturers, is that a lot of technology, because it's the demand that the people want. They want a lot of technology, but it's a double-edged sword. When it works wonderfully. When it stops working, it incurs a lot of costs. So just keep that in mind if you are buying a new car. But please stay tuned for the next segment when we are going to be discussing the pros and cons of buying a used car. I'm obviously biased because I've never owned a new car before, so used cars are my thing. And please stay tuned for the last segment in which we will discuss the top 10 used cars to buy.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
All right, segment 2, we have the pros and cons of buying a used car. So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the short break. Here we are going to be discussing the pros and cons of buying a used car. So let's think of the pros first. Used cars are cheap. Yes, they are cheap. That is a double-edged sword. They could be cheap because they have a lot of problems, or they can be cheap simply due to depreciation. So we're going to try to figure out, especially when you get to segment 3, on the pros and on the tips of buying a used car, what exactly to look for and what exactly not to look for, and things to avoid, things to go for when you are buying a used car. There is a wide selection of used cars available. There is a huge selection. The beauty of the used car market is the fact that cars that may not have been attainable to you when they were brand new, once they begin to depreciate, are becoming more and more available. For example, a Cadillac CTS-V might be $70,000 when new. I mean, now you can buy a Cadillac CTS-V that's a few years old for $30,000. I mean, of course, this is not cash money prices that you're going to get $30,000 cash and pay for the car, but these are cars that, are more attainable. Yes, they might have tens of thousands of miles on them, but typically a car with 50 or 60,000 miles is not a complete basket case that should be avoided. I mean, some cars, you don't want them with any miles on them because they were bad from the beginning. But these cars, most cars, in speaking of general terms, 60, 70, even 80, 90, 100,000 miles is not a huge problem. So the fact is that there is a wide selection of cars available in the used car market. You can get a used Toyota Corolla, you can get a used Cadillac DeVille, you can get a used Mercedes-Benz S-Class, a used Rolls-Royce even. I mean, there is such a wide selection available. When you are buying a new car, you are really limited to your budget, and basically you're limited to what is available. There are certain new cars that are simply not as good as cars of old. And if you are really doing your research and you want a specific automobile, you might want to go and check the used market, especially if it's something that is not made anymore, instead of trying to find one new. I mean, every once in a while, you get a new car that super desirable and everybody wants it, but the general consensus is most people don't buy brand new cars. And if they do, they are, people who are buying brand new cars, economy cars, sedans, family cars, vans, things of that sort. Interesting cars. Most people can't afford to buy them when they are new. So just keep that in mind. If you want an interesting car, if you want a fun car, there are more fun cars available on the used car market that might have a couple of, 1,000 miles on them, that might be, a few years old, but they are still very viable and they still have a lot of life left in them. Let's talk about how these cars can be bought without having to worry about high insurance costs. The older your car is, the less it is worth, and therefore the less you have to pay for insurance. If you go and buy a brand new car, and let's say you get full coverage on it, and your car is worth $30,000, that is going to be higher in insurance than if you were to buy a used car that's worth $15,000 and get full coverage on it. Because the insurance company keeps in mind is that, especially if you get full coverage, if anything happens to the car, flood damage, gets in a car accident, catches on fire, God forbid, the insurance company is going to have to pay for that. And they are going to charge you a higher premium each month because they know that if anything happens to your high value car, they're going to have to pay most of it. So they're asking you to pay more to help them in a sense. With a used car that's worth half, a quarter as much as a brand new car, if anything happens to the car, that's less money that the insurance company has to pay to replace it. So that's less money that you end up having to pay either. This is definitely for people who are speaking on a budget, or people who are just frugal and who don't have a bunch of money to throw away, or who don't like to throw away a bunch of money. Used cars are cheaper in the sense that they are cheaper to buy, and they are cheaper to insure, and a lot of times they are cheaper to maintain because the previous owner already took care of a bunch of high-cost maintenance. So that's something you ought to keep in mind when purchasing a used car. Let's talk about factory bugs. Factory bugs are something that really have to be taken into consideration when buying a new car. For example, years ago, about 10 years ago now, Toyota came out with a new generation of the Prius. Well, the new generation of the Prius had these defective floor mats. I know this is odd, but these floor mats would sometimes get wedged on top of the accelerator pedal, causing the car to accelerate without any warning, without any input from the driver. The floor mat would get stuck, it would press the gas pedal, the car would accelerate, and then this caused car accidents. Even some people died as a result of their Priuses accelerating. This is an example of a manufacturer fault. Not all cars are perfect from the get-go. Some cars need to be recalled. And when you own a brand new car, that is something to take into consideration. It is something to take into consideration in the sense that the brand new car is going to have some sort of, or might have some sort of fault that is going to need to be worked out within a few months of purchasing it, especially if it's been recalled so early. With a used car, a lot of times, depending on how old the used car is, the previous owner has already taken care of that. And especially if you look at the car history report, Carfax, not only Carfax does it, a lot of other companies do car history reports, you would find that this thing has already been taken care of on such and such date by such and such owner at such and such dealership, and the paperwork is already there, it's already been registered, so you don't have to worry about doing that anymore. So, that's an extra cost you don't have to incur, or especially if the car was under warranty, it may not have been, expensive to repair in the first place, but that's one less thing you have to worry about when buying a new car, when buying a used car, I should say, is that certain bugs that may come from the factory with a new car will not be present in a used car because chances are the previous owner has already taken care of that. Let's think about, for those concerned with image. I know I come from a slightly pretentious family. We only drive luxury cars, and not because we are rich, but because this is what we prefer, and some of us are concerned with image. I'm not going to mention any names, but there are some people in my family who have S-classes that are basket cases, but they have an S-Class, and they are able to brag that they have an S-Class. I am not one of those people, but I am slightly concerned with image. I like my American luxury cars. So for those who are concerned with image, just like me and my family, you could look rich for cheap. I mean, you can get yourself a Cadillac and be a high school student who drives a Cadillac like I was. I know my Cadillac wasn't worth anything. I know my Cadillac was worth less than most of the cars in the parking lot, but the fact that it was a Cadillac, it was a full-size luxury sedan that was expensive when it was new. People tip their hats when I drove into the parking lot senior year in my pearl white Cadillac Deville. I mean, people liked it. People thought it was fancy. People thought I was well off, even though I was broke and I had to pay $5 of fuel to get there, and $5 of fuel in that car would last one round trip. It would go to school and come from school, and it would be on empty again. But for those who are concerned with image, it's very easy to find a cheap, used, fairly reliable luxury car that is depreciated beyond all measure, and you can buy it for $1,500. I mean, and it will last you. So for those concerned with image, used luxury cars a lot of times are a bargain. Yes, they may not be perfect because luxury cars, more technology, more features, more things to break. But as far as engine and transmission and electricity goes, I mean, the three real things you need in a car, they're fine. And a lot of times luxury cars are built better than other cars, so those components tend to last longer in luxury cars anyway. And you don't have to worry about voiding the warranty. Now, this is something that I want to talk a bit about, because car manufacturers from the beginning give their car a warranty at the dealership. However, there are certain things you cannot do to the car because it will void the warranty of the car. So, for example, I don't know if this is an actual thing, but some people like to put large rims on their car. Large rims on a car means that you're going to have to get lower profile tires, and in some extreme cases, you're going to have to raise and modify the suspension of the car. Now, if you do that, you risk damaging the car, or you risk making it you risk doing something to the car that makes it not drivable in the same way that it was intended to be driven. All of these things, if you do that to a brand new car, you will void the warranty, meaning that if anything happens, the car manufacturer is going to be like, look, we told you not to do that. You went ahead and did it anyways. We're not responsible to any damages you incur to your car. With a used car, you don't have to worry about that, because especially on cars that are, 5 to 10 years old, there's 0 to 5-year-old, cars out there that are still under warranty. But 5 to 10 years old, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, 20 plus. I mean, these cars of that age are long gone as far as their warranties go. So you can do whatever you please to your car to modify it, to make it sportier, to make it nicer, to make it prettier, to do anything that you want to do. And it will not void the warranty because the car is no longer under warranty. So if you want to buy your Cadillac and then put giant rims on it and then put hydraulics and all sorts of other foolishness, I mean, you are more than welcome to do that. If you want to buy your Honda, lower it, camber the wheels, put a loud exhaust on it, and put cams or whatever the people do nowadays, I mean, you're more than welcome to do that too. You don't have to worry about, the car dealership, holding this above your heads. Like, if you do this, we're going to cancel your warranty. You're going to void it. You can't do. No, you don't have to worry about all of that. So people who like to modify their cars, people who like to tune their cars, people who like to do anything to their cars, really, they can do that when they have a used car. You are at liberty to do that because you don't have to worry about voiding your warranty. Just keep in mind, with any car, if you modify it, you risk damaging it because there are certain cars that are more friendly to modification than others. For example, my friend Grant, my best friend, has a Ford Mustang. He's only ever driven Mustang since I've known him, really. He always, upgrades his performance. He gets, lower springs. He gets bigger intake valves or whatnot. I don't know. He makes the cars faster, essentially. And what he does is very tasteful. It's very nice, but it also makes his car suffer in reliability a bit. If he had bought a brand new 2020 Mustang and did everything that he's done to his 2014 Mustang, he would void his warranty because they don't allow you to modify your exhaust. They don't allow you to do those things because these are things that are going to make the car not pass emissions, especially if you live in a place that, checks things like that every year where you have to get inspections. These are things that are going to cause, the car to be a bit of a headache for those who are going to end up having to repair it. But if you do it yourself, when the car is no longer under warranty, you don't have to worry about voiding the warranty, and whoever's repairing the car is not going to care because chances are you're going to take it to a place that is familiar with used cars and what people do to them. You go and take that to the dealership, they're going to tell you your car has a bunch of problems, you have to get rid of this, you have to get rid of that, because they're going to repair the car according to the manufacturer's specs. They are not very friendly to modified cars. So that's basically the pros and the cons of buying a used car. And so please stay tuned to the next segment in which we're going to talk about some tips for buying used cars. And if you stay tuned till the very end, I'm going to be talking about, in my opinion, the best 10 used cars to buy, especially if you are on a budget. So please stay tuned and enjoy the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Okay, welcome back, my fellow car lovers, car people. We are going to be talking about tips for buying used cars. So let's keep in mind, like I said earlier, buying used cars is a lot more difficult than buying new cars. Buying new cars, they have so many apps nowadays that you can just configure your car and then pay for it and then, have it delivered to your house or have it, put at your dealership or all sorts of other things. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with new cars nowadays. Used cars, however, are a different case. Keep in mind, when you're buying anything used, it's in used condition. It may have been abused. It may not have been abused. It may have been taken care of. There's no way for you to know because us as people, we don't know everything. Not only do we not know everything, we don't know everyone, and we don't know how people took care of their cars. So let's just keep that in mind whenever we are buying a used car. This is one thing that I see people do a lot, especially people of my age, when their parents are buying them cars in high school. And I'm 22, so I'm right around that 20-something. So rounding up, if you're 16, you're about 20 years old. If you're 22, you're about 20. A lot of us are still living at home with our parents or just fresh in college or fresh out of college or still in college. A lot of us, some of us younger ones of this generation are, just finishing high school, but we're in that stage where we don't have very well paying jobs yet and we can't go and incur a loan for a brand new car. So a lot of times our parents buy us used cars or they help us co-sign for a cheaper new car or a cheaper, certified pre-owned car, which is still is a fancy term for slightly used. So when you're in that age and your parents are buying you a car, your parents are most likely going to buy you something safe, something fuel efficient, and something easy to repair. Safe, fuel efficient, easy to repair. Ding, 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 Japanese cars. So a lot of people in the used car market think, it's a Japanese car that automatically means it's reliable. And I will tell you that is false. Not all used Japanese cars are reliable. Japanese cars do have a reputation for reliability. This is true, especially cars like Toyota and Honda. However, that's a double-edged sword. Because those cars have a reputation for reliability, those cars are the ones that tend to be abused by their previous owners. For example, you might get yourself a Toyota Camry with 160,000 miles on it. 160,000 miles normally for a Toyota Camry is absolutely nothing. These things could go to 300,000 miles and not even skip a beat. However, you have to think of the demographic who buys these cars. The demographic who buys those cars are the same demographic who may not have enough money to repair the cars or do all the necessary maintenance, and who may skip things like oil changes, who may skip things like, brakes and other things of that sort, because the cars are so reliable, they can handle a lot of abuse before they finally crap out. Well, when that car gets to its second or third owner, especially after years of abuse by the previous owners, you're getting a basket case. At 160,000 miles, that's a lot of miles for any car. And even though the Toyota Camry, and I'm not just picking on Toyota Camrys, there's other cars out there with this same scenario, even though the Toyota Camry may be known to go to well into the 200,000-300,000 mile range, because the car has been abused, it hasn't had regular maintenance because the person before it either could not afford it or thought the car was reliable so they didn't have to do all of that, you're getting a basket case. You're getting a car that is on its last leg. That car might last you 10, 15, 20,000 miles and then boom, it gives you a transmission problem or gives you an engine problem or a head gasket goes or whatnot because the car was poorly maintained. I saw this happen to my friend Nick back in college. Nick had a Ford Taurus that was his first car. Ford Taurus, poor thing, ended up crapping out at 110,000 miles. Bless its heart. He had to get rid of it. It wasn't worth anything. The axle had gone. It just wasn't worth it. So he took out a loan for $5,000 and gone and bought himself, I believe, a 2006 or 2007 Scion TC, a small little, compact economy car, 2 doors, kind of sporty, made by Toyota. Scion was made by Toyota. So very reliable car when it was new. He bought this from a used car lot. The car had over 170,000 miles on it. That car lasted probably 4 months before it gave Nick a huge problem, and he ended up having to get rid of it. He just spent $5,000 on a car that only lasted him 4 or 5 months before giving a huge problem, and he ended up having to get rid of it. What he went through was the same thing that a lot of people go through. They think Japanese car made by Toyota. Yes, it has a lot of miles, but it's going to be reliable. He fell for it. The car had not been maintained properly. His engine crapped out on him because the people who had owned it before never did any scheduled maintenance on it, never took care of it, and then it was a basket case by the time it came to him. So beware of cars that have a reputation for reliability, because those cars that have a reputation for reliability tend to get abused, and then when they tend to get abused, by the time they get down to you, they may be on their last leg, they may not last. So beware of cars, especially like Japanese cars. Let's talk about the Carfax. Oh dear Jesus. Okay. The Carfax, the vehicle history report. This is so important. It's so important especially when you're buying a used car that is a few years old. We're not talking about the 0 to 5 year range. We're talking about the 5 to 10, 10 to 15 year range. When the person that you're buying it from may be the second owner of the car, maybe the third owner of the car. Not to say that this is something to be avoided. Don't buy cars that have had more than a certain amount of owners. But the more owners that it passes through, the more history that it has, the more places it's been, the more things it's had to have done. So keep in mind, you must always check the Carfax. For some people, this is a make it or break it. If the car doesn't have a Carfax, they're not buying it. I'm not one of those people. I'm not that particular, but some people are. Here's what the Carfax does. Especially if the car has been maintained properly at the dealership or at a well-known car, repair shop like Firestone or whatever, they are going to put everything that they've done to the car in a database that is attached to the VIN number of the car, vehicle identification number, that is attached to the VIN of the car, and that once you look it up in this national database, it's basically a background check for your car. It's going to give you as far back as where the car was made, when it was originally sold to the first owner, where the car was registered, at what mileage did they change spark plugs, did they do a tune-up, blah, blah, blah. Cars with a long history report tend to be very well maintained. I, on the other hand, I am not that good with keeping history reports up for my car. When I bought my car, I did not check the Carfax. When I bought my car, I did not make sure to take it to the dealership so everything was documented. Sometimes I did work myself. Sometimes I had a mechanic come to the house and do work himself. Sometimes I took it to shops that didn't do things like that. Not to say that everybody should follow my example, but I am a person, I don't want to toot my own horn or whatnot, but I deem myself able to take chances with cars because I know cars very well. I know what to do, what not to do. Not everybody is privy to cars like I am. So if you are not, and you are buying a used car, especially if you haven't done your proper research to know which cars are worth buying without a Carfax, which cars aren't, you have to get the Carfax. You have to find out some history about the car, because there are some dirty secrets that the car has that the person who's selling it to you is not going to want to tell you, or frankly, they might not even know themselves. You have to do your research. You have to make sure if the car had any recalls, if those recalls have been taken care of, those things are going to be documented. All of this is in the Carfax, the vehicle history report, the background check, whatever you want to call it. All of those things are going to be included, and that can make your used car buying experience a lot less of a headache. To piggyback off of that, do your research on the car you intend to buy. I like to live my life in such a way that I know more about my car than the mechanic. I'm a bit ridiculous. I know how long my car is. I know how wide it is. I know how much it weighs. I know the firing order of the cylinders. I know where the car was built. I know how the car was built. I know that it is front wheel drive. It is not body on frame construction. It's unibody construction. I know that the frame is made of galvanized steel. I know that I have a V6 supercharged car with 240 horsepower. I know that I have McPherson struts in the front and the rear. I know all of that about my Buick Park Avenue. You have to get to a point where you study your car more than the mechanic studies your car. Because when you go and buy a used car, you need to know what you are buying. You need to know the common issues these cars have, what sorts of things that this car might need to be repaired after it's had 120,000 miles on it, especially if you're buying a car that's that used. You need to know these things. And I repeat, you need to know these things. It is so important because a lot of people, they go and buy a Mitsubishi Mirage that's been used that has 100,000 miles on it, and they think they're getting a good car because it was cheap. Absolutely not. You are buying a basket case. You are buying a car that was a basket case from the factory. Do not buy a car like that. But especially a lot of my friends who don't know cars, goodness, they go and buy these cars, especially when they're going to buy their first car. They go and buy these cars. Well, it was a good deal. Not because it's a good deal doesn't mean you have to buy it, goodness. Sometimes you ought to spend a bit more money on the car knowing that you're getting a car that's going to give you peace of mind than if you were to get a good deal and then end up buying a car that's an absolute basket case. Don't do it. Do your research. You're going to find out that some cars are to be avoided. For example, my first two cars were Cadillac Devilles. They had the infamous North Star engine. I would tell you, if you're going to buy a car like a Cadillac, make sure you know what the problems that the North Star engine can give. For example, head gaskets. For example, burning oil. For example, head bolts, water pump, anything with the cooling, alternators. I mean, these are all things you have to be worried about when you go and buy a car with a North Star engine. And you might buy a car that the person says, oh yeah, it just needs one thing, and they don't tell you what the one thing is until after you've made the purchase. The car runs fine for 2 weeks, and then boom, head gasket goes. Well, he didn't tell you that the car was going to need a head gasket soon. Exactly. That's what happens if you might buy a used North Star engine. If you're going to buy a third generation Altima or a Maxima made of that same era, we're talking about 2003 to around 2009, 2010. Those transmissions in those cars are known to be weak. They are known to fail. You're going to go buy a Nissan Altima 2006 Altima, let's say. It's like, oh, it's a Japanese car. It's good. And then, 4 or 5 months into it, boom, your transmission goes. I mean, these are things, if you had done your research to know the common problems of the cars, you wouldn't have to deal with them. There are certain cars that they can handle a lot of abuse and still work fine. For example, any car with a Buick 3800 engine in it, especially the Series 2, you go and buy yourself a Buick Park Avenue or a Buick LeSabre with 150,000 miles on it, you can drive that thing to Connecticut and back and it'll still work just fine, even if you bought it and you didn't even do a history report on it, because those cars are just that reliable. For example, I bought my Buick Park Avenue with 75,000 miles on it back in January of 2018. Within 3 weeks, I took a trip up to Georgia, 12-hour round trip. The car did not skip a beat. There are certain used cars you can't trust that much to do something like that. Of course, do I recommend that everybody does that? Absolutely not. But, these are things that you have to keep in mind. So do your research. If you live in a place that has salted roads in the winter, make sure to check for rust. Surface rust is fine. Frame rust, structural rust, that's a problem. You can have problems with your brake lines. If you're buying a really older car, we're talking about classic car territory, 25 years plus, check floor pans, check trunks. These are known places for rust. You don't want to buy a car that is being rusted out. Rust is to cars as cancer is to humans. If you have cancer, your cancer could spread. If your car has rust, the rust could spread to the point where the car, even if the transmission and the engine work fine, the car is no longer viable because it's rusted through. So check for rust if you live in a place with salted roads. If you're not privy to cars, bring along a trusted mechanic. That's basically to piggyback off of my point to do your research. If you can't do your research, bring a mechanic with you. If it's possible, buy a car from an old lady or an old man. Old people tend not to drive very often. They tend to have a bit more money, so they do scheduled maintenance on their cars. And any car that you buy from an old person, is most likely going to be in better condition than if you were to buy it from a young person who just got out of college, for example, who may have times where they were not financially stable and they had to skip maintenance on their cars. Because when you're not financially stable, I mean, the first thing you tend to neglect is your car, because you're like, that can wait. I don't need to do that right now. And when you're in the used car market and you bought a car from someone like that, you might end up having to deal with years of missed maintenance on your car that could end up costing you a lot more than you actually spent on the car. And don't shy away from all luxury cars. Some luxury cars are very well built and very reliable. And especially when you take cars from the 90s. If you're going to be buying a 90s car, a luxury car is probably the way to go. Because these cars back then, luxury still meant luxury in terms of build quality and comfort and reliability instead of technology. So if you're buying a car from the era of luxury cars, that meant reliability, build quality, and comfort, I mean, that may be a very good car to buy. First car that comes to mind is Lincoln Town Car. I mean, those cars are practically indestructible. So just keep those in mind, those tips, when it comes to buying used cars. You may find that buying used cars is not as scary as some people make it out to be if you follow these tips. So please stay tuned for the last segment, in which I will discuss the top 10 used cars to buy, especially if you are on a budget. So thank you for listening this far, and please stay tuned after the break.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
All right, welcome to segment 4, my good people. These are the top 10 best used cars to buy, in my opinion, as David Lucy Mabel. Number 10, and these are no particular order. I'm not putting the best first or the worst last. I'm just, thinking of cars. Number 10, Lexus Ls400. I will say with great confidence, the Lexus Ls is the best car made in all of the 90s. Anybody who says otherwise, fight me. Not really, but actually, I will argue in defense of this car. These luxury cars were made to basically be a more efficient, cheaper option to the German luxury cars. And I will tell you, how many 1992 Mercedes-Benz S-Classes do you see versus 1992 Lexus LS400s? You see a lot more Lexus LSs of this first and second generation of the 90s than you do S-Classes. Why? Because they were better built, they were more reliable, and they were simpler to work on. They've got that Toyota V8 engine, the same one that was put in the Toyota Celsior over in Japan. The Toyota Celsior is basically the Japanese market of the Lexus LS400, a full-size luxury sedan in Japan, marketed under Toyota. These cars are amazing. They're indestructible. You can buy one with 150,000 miles on it, and as long as you make sure obvious that, regular things have been done, that car is a car that can last you another 150,000 miles. That's not even an exaggeration. I've seen these being sold with 250,000 miles, and because it's a luxury car, these tend to be owned by older people who are well established. These people tend to take care of their cars. So don't be afraid of buying a Lexus Ls400. Of course, these cars are, in the 25 to 30 years old range now. If you get a late model one of the 400 before they end up being the LS430 in the early 2000s, from I think 1995 to 1999, those cars are in the 20 to 25 year range, and the early ones are from the 25 to 30 year range. So these cars are going to run you $3,000-$4,000 in really good condition. One that might need some work might be $2,000, maybe $1,500, depending on where you live, depending on who's selling it, depending on how you're able to talk them down. So these are not modern cars, but nonetheless, they are very good used cars, and they can be used as daily drivers, especially for those like me who just want an honest car on four wheels without all the frills that modern technology has to offer. So Lexus Ls400, keep that in mind. Number 9. My car, Buick Park Avenue. Look out, especially for the Ultra that is supercharged. This car has a kick. I mean, it really does. It has the legendary 3800 Series V6, the Series 2, in this car, the ones that were made from 97 to 2005. And there's the first generation Park Avenue that was made from 1992 to 1996, I believe. Those cars all have the 3800. The Ultras have the supercharged 3800. The Buick Park Avenue Ultra, my generation, the second generation, makes 240 horsepower. I know that's not a lot by modern standards, but for a car like that, that car moves. It moves, especially with the supercharger when you're passing speed and all of that. That car is a great performer, and I will not shy away from recommending this to anybody. Again, this is a luxury car. People who own these tend to take care of them. All I will say, it's an old people car. The gauges are large. They're easy to see. It handles like a boat. It has conservative styling. This is an old people car. I'm not going to pretend that, this is it's not sexy. In other words, it's a large American luxury sedan. If you're into that, this is a wonderful car to buy, especially when considering that the next up alternative would be a Cadillac Deville, and those had the North Star engines, and that's a headache in itself. So if you're looking for an American luxury sedan that's very reliable, Buick Park Avenue, especially the Ultra. Any Ford Panther platform comes in number 7. So this is actually 4 cars. Ford Crown Victoria, Mercury Grand Marquis, Lincoln Town Car, Mercury Marauder. When you are buying a Ford Crown Victoria, you are going to want to avoid used police models. Police cars tend to go through a lot of abuse. You do not want a used police car. A lot of times the electrics are screwed up because all the fancy electrics that they have for the police cars, literally, in order for them to be sold to the public, they snip the wires and yank the things out. They are not great. Don't buy a used police car. The Mercury Grand Marquis is a great car. Lincoln Town Car is a great car. What you're going to want to be careful on these, especially the Lincoln Town cars, is the air suspension in the back. Air suspension in the back is not like the GM air suspension, where if it goes out, you can still drive for 100,000 miles. If the air suspension in one of these cars goes out, it's going to be, on the ground, nearly scraping. Not to say it's undrivable, but you want to get that either converted to regular struts and springs, or you're going to want to pay special attention to that. But these cars are extremely common, so parts are very easy to find, and they're very simple to work on. The Ford Modular V8, body-on-frame construction, rear-wheel drive, these cars are super reliable. I mean, they are as durable as Earth itself. So you don't have to worry about, the cars, crapping out on you. And even if they do, they are very easy to repair. So keep that in mind. Any Ford Panther platform. And the Mercury Marauder is a great performer too. You have Toyota Avalon. This is a caveat. Remember what I said about Japanese cars. These cars have a reputation for reliability. The only reason why I'm not mentioning the Camry or Corolla is because those are cheaper. Those tend to be owned by people who can't take care of them properly, and then they end up being basket cases that are still very expensive when they get on the used market. The Toyota Avalon is a semi-luxury car. So people who tend to own these are people who are a bit wealthier, people who tend to be older, who don't drive their cars a lot, who take care of their cars, all the stereotypes that comes with old car ownership. So, Toyota Avalon is like on the level with Buick in terms of luxury. This is a very comfortable car, a very reliable car, made by Toyota. Parts are super easy to find. They're super easy to work on. Toyota Avalon is a good car. I will say they are one of the more expensive cars that I've mentioned because they tend to hold their value very, very well by virtue of them being a Toyota. Any Honda Accord, same thing. Watch out. These cars, very reliable, so they tend to be abused, but especially ones with the V6 models. The V6 models offer good performance. These cars are not extremely heavy, especially if you get a V6 with Honda VTEC. I mean, that's a good performing car. And if you're looking to modify your car, Hondas are very popular in the tuner car scene because they're easy to modify. So if you're looking to modify your car, a V6 Accord, I mean, you can't really go wrong with that. An Acura RL. This offers Honda reliability. In the luxury car world, it almost seems that Acura has almost been forgotten. You hear a lot about Lexus. You hear about Cadillac, even Buick to a lesser extent. Of course, you hear about Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Audi, all those really luxurious cars, but you tend to forget Acura. And when I did my segment, or when I did my podcast on luxury cars, like, I think I forgot to mention Acura, but Acura have always been very reliable vehicles. And the one thing I will say I like Acura 1,000 times more than I like Honda is because Acura, they are luxury vehicles. They tend to be very nicer and built better as far as interior materials go. Honda's interiors are cheap. I am not going to try to sugarcoat it. They are cheap. Hard plastic, all over the place, especially when you get a Honda that's 10 to 15 years old. I had a Honda Civic Hybrid. It was the cheapest interior I had ever been in a modern automobile. It was terrible. If I had an Acura, I've been in Acuras. An Acura feels like you are sitting in a Cadillac. You have good leather, soft touch materials, wood trim, and you get Honda reliability. You can't go wrong with an Acura. The Acura RL especially is a full-size luxury sedan, V6, rear-wheel drive, 225 horsepower. These cars are good. I actually almost bought an Acura RL before I bought my Buick Park Avenue. The person had already sold it before I had a time to get the money together, but I was seriously considering one of these cars. The way I described it, it was the reliability of a Honda with the build quality of a Lexus. You don't see these as often, but these are very good cars. Mercedes-Benz E320, especially the W210 model. These cars were made from 1996 to 2002 in that generation. I know some people out there might criticize me because after I had a rant about German cars and how they are best to be avoided, it would be ironic that I would recommend a German car on this list. However, hear me out. These cars are very well built and very reliable. And because they are not S-classes, they don't have all the technology foolishness like the oh dear, the airmatic suspension that tends to go out, all the electrical issues associated with the S-Class. The E-Class is an honest automobile. In fact, I believe the E-Class is the epitome of what a car should be. This E-Class, the W210 model, made from 1996 to 2002, these were designed and engineered before Chrysler took over Mercedes-Benz. You don't want the one after this because that has a bunch of Chrysler reliability issues. But this is the one to have if you're going to buy an E-Class. These came in a sedan version. They had an AMG version that I believe was a very good AMG car, tended to be very reliable. And they came with a station wagon version. And if I'm not mistaken, they had a convertible version. It wasn't the E-Class. It was like the CLK or something along those lines. I don't quote me on that one. But my dad has one of these. I drive it. It's a joy to drive. It really is. The rear wheel drive, it has about 220 something horsepower. It's not extremely fast, but it picks up very well. The car is very well balanced. The steering is not too heavy. It's not too light. It feels engaged. This car is a proper car. It is a proper German car. It is well built. It will hold up. The materials are absolutely wonderful. My dad's is a 2000. It is 20 years old and it looks nearly perfect. I mean, these cars hold up very well over time. Let's say Chevy Impala. If you're looking for an honest American sedan, Chevy Impala. Look for the ones, especially of the early 2000s, that have the Buick 3800 engine. Those cars are nearly impossible to kill. You do not want a Ford Taurus. When you're coming to American cars, avoid Chrysler, avoid Dodge, avoid the Ford Taurus especially. That's made by Ford. But if you're going to want an American sedan, buy the Chevy Impala. They are not extremely good looking, but they are very reliable, especially with the Buick 3800 engine. And last but not least, this is number one on the list. You have the Buick LeSabre. These cars are semi-luxurious. They're not as luxurious as a Park Avenue. They're surprisingly fuel efficient with that Buick 3800 engine because they are not as heavy as the Park Avenue. They are not as large. The engine is under less stress, so the engine is able to get better fuel economy, and they were never offered with the supercharger. So if you drive these things properly, you are able to get 30 miles per gallon in an American luxury sedan on the highway. And these take regular fuel. The Buick LeSabre is a very good car, and for the longest while, it was the best-selling mid-size car in America. So keep that in mind. You see Buick LeSabres all over the place. They are extremely reliable, and they are a very good car to buy. You will find, though, they are old people cars. A lot of old people own them, which is a good thing when it comes to buying a used car because they tend to take care of them. They're not exactly the most attractive car ever. I think they're gorgeous, but I'm also very old-fashioned in my tastes and whatnot. So just keep that in mind when it comes to buying used cars. Now, thank you for listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, I would thank you very much. And I thank you once again for listening, and you all have a good night.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.